Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, and I have a different show for you this time. Instead of the weekly show, I'm going to have a special guest, Jordan Samuels-Thomas, on, and we're going to talk about Silfverberg, the Ducks, how they're doing, the trade deadline, all kinds of other stats and things and whatnot. So sit back and enjoy the show. And Jordan, thanks for coming on the second time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I'm always excited to get on the line with you and talk Ducks hockey.
Yeah, it was fun. I remember last time we had a good conversation last season, and then you've written a couple more really good articles for The Athletic. So I figured we'd talk a little bit, especially about Silfverberg. He's been, a big topic with this team. You wrote an article on him, and I think you'll agree, but a lot of people focus on goals and assists and scoring. But when you look at Silfverberg and him making the All-Star game, it isn't just about point production, is it?
No, it's not, and he's doing the point production part. Very balanced score. He's been consistent for them every year, but it's really the little things. I mean, the Ducks haven't found the on-ice success, but he's the type of guy that if, the team was in contention, he'd be the guy who would be out there with the last minute of the game out there defending the lead, or the same guy who'd be out there if their team needed a goal. So I think he's a really important player for the Ducks who's had a really strong season, and it's always good to see him get rewarded with the All-Star selection, because they could have easily gone with more familiar name like Getzlaf or Fowler, but they went with a guy who truly deserved it.
Yeah, I agree as far as him truly deserving. I'm right there with you. You know what's kind of interesting is some people look at the All-Star selection for him and they're happy for Silfverberg in terms of, like you said, he's leading the team in goals, but he's playing all around team defense, great two-way player. He's thrown out there in any kind of situation, as you mentioned as well. But some people are looking at the team as a whole, and they're thinking, well, if Silfverberg's our all-star and that's it, then this team's in trouble. There's not a whole lot of other players on there that are all-star worthy. And obviously we know how the season's gone. What do you think about that in terms of, well, it's good for him, but doesn't show a good reflection on the team? Agree, disagree?
I disagree. I mean, the way the All-Star process is now, I mean, it's hard for any team to have two All-Star levels. And obviously there's different, the selection process is different, right? You have the fan part of the voting, the coaches. So, I mean, it's good that they have one representative. I think it's extremely hard to have two. I mean, in terms of having an all-star season, I agree that Silfverberg is the only one who's having an all-star season. But a lot of times when you come to selections like this, it's hard for you to have multiple all-stars, or even a guy who's even worthy of an all-star, which Silfverberg certainly is. But on a team that's struggling, it's usually hard to find a player who's really worthy of being that, outside of just being selected just so a market is represented. But I think he's had a really good season, and though the production hasn't been there all around, I think that if the team was stronger, I think you'd see more players represented.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of been, I guess as Ducks fans, we've kind of been spoiled in the years past, because we knew every season pretty much that the team was going to make the playoffs. It was just a question of, where were they going to be ranked and how far were they going to go. And then, of course, as you and I talked last year, the season was all crazy because with Carlisle and all of that situation. So we knew last season was up in the air, and now this season is also up in the air as well. So I agree.
It's up in the air, but it's not really. I mean, if you want to, like, when you're doing a rebuild, you have to be realistic. Like, it's always nice in the stories. There's always that organization that gets that rebuild going right away and they exceed expectations. But for a successful organization, you have to wait and be patient with the process. So they have a new head coach, Dallas Eakins, and anytime you have that, there's gonna be growing pains. There's going to be a change in everything. I've already discussed it in terms of my writing for The Athletic, in terms of just the system changes, the change in culture, and all that takes time. It's not just a drop of the hat. It starts and built during training camp, but really, it's sort of like the college head coach, right? You're given a few years to really install your culture and system, get the guys in that fit your system before you can truly be judged on the job you're doing or the true strength of the organization where they're at. So I think I'd always push patience when you have a first year head coach with a new organization and the organization's in transition.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I've seen that too. It seems like people are more impatient. A couple points on that we can focus on. I guess one would be, people may come back and say, okay, Jordan, I agree. Dallas Aikens is coming in. He has to get his system and whatnot. But then some people, I'm just playing devil's advocate, they may say, well, half of the goals team is up with the Ducks, and they've been under Dallas before. So shouldn't the rebuild take a little bit less time? What would you say to that?
I mean, I think there's an argument that could be made there, but at the same time, the AHL's far different than the NHL. The caliber of players that they're going against is different. So that's not really comparing, apples to apples. A player can come out of junior and they can be ready to make an impact in the AHL. They can be an AHL all-star for years and years to come, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be ready for the NHL or ever ready for the NHL. I think there's a lot of promising prospects that the Ducks have. And another thing to keep in mind, like there's a chunk of players who are extremely young, right? Entry-level guys under the age of 22, but so they might not be having the production success that you might see from other rookies who are the same age on other teams, but it's easier for you to have that production success when the team is stronger. If you're drafted and you're playing for a St. Louis Blues or Boston Bruins or something like that, it's obviously going to be easier time. These guys are getting so much experience that should help them in the long run. So the production may not be there, but in the long run, they're going to be ready to contribute in more roles sooner rather than later, because it's really trial by fire for these guys.
Yeah, and I've seen that too, as you talked about. A lot of the younger players, some people are a little bit more impatient. The Max Jones, Steele, Terry. Of course, Terry's unfortunately hurt right now, but I've seen that with, as you've mentioned, the dynamic of this team not being super strong, so you have a lot of younger players in there. And I think, again, it's kind of the theme you talked about, being patient, because just because, we talk about this on my show too, and you probably agree, everyone feels like their prospects are the best. And I think they have high expectations. Hey, you're going to get this guy, and, he's going to be a 30-goal scorer in his first season. And it's like, okay. And I think some people put some pressure, for example, on Max Jones to be like that. And he hasn't scored a bazillion goals right away. It doesn't mean that he won't, as you've talked about. It takes time. So I think that's part of the dynamic here too, as well as giving these younger guys a little bit more of a chance. And as you said, the team dynamic, you have some veterans on the team, but the team overall is kind of shifting and trying to mold. So for this season, it's a work in progress, basically.
For sure. And even if we're looking at something as black and white as goal scoring, the team is struggling to create high quality chances. I touched on that in the mid-season analytic report.
Correct.
And that their expected goal shares are amongst the lowest in the league. So there's not really that many goals to be scored. So it makes it tougher on a young team. So I think they're playing faster, but to an expectation 30-goal season, 20-goal season for a rookie, even on a really good team, that doesn't happen often. That's, one or two guys a year. Exactly. And we have three or four first-year full-time NHL forwards and an extremely young blue line. So I think very talented prospector. I still believe in a lot of those guys, but at the same time, you have to be realistic and know that it's a hard game being played, and these guys are 19, 20, 21, and it's a process.
Yeah, and even, some people forget, you look at the stats, and a lot of people look at the team stats, and they're like, okay, the Ducks, the Sharks, the Kings, they're all towards the bottom of the Pacific. Throw up the arms, the season's kind of an over type thing. But if you look at it, if the Ducks, if they managed some kind of a win streak, even if it was, 3 or 4 games, not saying that we want to make the playoffs and be a contender, but they're really not that far away from being a decent team.
Yeah, I think like the Ducks have been really interesting this year on that front because, like I said, they are struggling to develop goals, but they still have Gibson, who he might not have the phenomenal numbers, but like he's playing extremely well and has kept the games tight. Right, they're in a lot of really low scoring games, so if they can just find that little bit of extra offense, it's going to make a huge difference. In the beginning of the year, they were playing a lot of tight games and they're winning because of Gibson and because of timely goals. So if they can kind of get back to, instead of losing that one goal game and winning more of those one goal games and winning at low scoring, then you can see them definitely make a surge back up the standings. Like in terms of, I think they're playing winning hockey. It's just difficult to win in today's NHL when you're not scoring goals. And if you just kind of compare where they are as a team to other teams, well, specifically LA and San Jose that you mentioned, like LA has done a great job in generating offensive chances, and their expected goal shares are amongst the best in the league, but they struggle in having finishers. They just have guys who can't score. So they're both yielding the same results, but they're getting it in completely different ways. So I think that's something that's also worth following the duration of the season and through while both coaches are on, or both teams have a fresh coach and are building into the future.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think at times the Ducks have been like that too, as far as you've seen like Max Jones, for instance. I know I talked about him earlier, but there's been chances that he's had, and he's had near misses. It seems like Sam Steele has been in that category, and Troy Terry as well. So to me, it seems like there is some of that element with this team, especially with the young guys. It feels like they're put in place together. They're getting a little bit better as the season's progressed. Like you said, they're in really, really tight games. It's true. A lot of these Duck games are decided, 1 or 2 goal affairs, overtime. Even last night's game against Nashville was a shootout, which they pulled out, which was, again, a very close game. And Gibson made a huge, huge save in that one, as you were talking about him keeping the Ducks in it. He really made a fantastic save. Where I was sitting, I couldn't believe it didn't go in. I had to look at the replay because it was such a close play.
Last night's a perfect example. I mean, he let up 4 goals, and you usually don't want to let up 4 goals for a win. But the way that game was going, he made the big saves to keep the Ducks within striking distance the whole game. So, like, that's the type of season he's having. He's not having a great statistical season, but whether it is a low-scoring game or the goals start going back and forth and chances start getting traded, he's made those big saves to keep him in there. And regardless of his numbers, I still think he's a top 5 goaltender in the league.
Oh yeah, you'll get no argument from me on that. I agree with you. There may be certain games where his numbers weren't quite as good as you said, but he's still up there. And like you said, he's a huge, huge reason why the Ducks do win games, even with the lack of offense. Another good piece that you wrote about too, talking about some of the players and analytics. On the Athletic, you talked about some of the players and how they've done. You mentioned Silfverberg in the piece. You also talked about Getzlaf, Raquel, Fowler, and Henrique. Most of these guys, again, just looking at goals, have been kind of the leaders on the team in scoring. Silfverberg with 15, Henrique with 14, Getz and Raquel with 10, and Fowler with 9. They're all up there in the top of the team. But I was reading your piece and going over, what do you think about some of the players and how they've done, kind of midway through the season in conjunction with your mid-season report you did, which was also a good look at the Ducks as well. In terms of these guys, I know it looks like some of them, their expected performances are exceeding, and then some maybe not so much.
Yeah, I mean, so for the Ducks report I did, it's really those guys are really driving everything for the team. And if you compare the report I did, the Ducks compared to the Kings, you'll see that there is a lot more positives on the Kings side, but those were the guys on the Ducks that are really driving play. We'll touch on a few of those guys, but I'll start off with Henrique. He had 2 goals last night, obviously, and he signed that contract. What was it, 2 summers ago, and he's been just so consistent for them, and I think he's such a great player for the young guys to be around. Like I really like his game. I think his contract that he has is valuable. and he's been steady. And then, like we've talked about Silfverberg, like he's had a phenomenal season. He's another guy that just does a little bit of everything. And Getzlaf and Raquel, like they're always going to be up there for the Ducks. Raquel, obviously, just a pure scorer, and Getzlaf just knows how to produce. And I wrote in that piece that I'd love to see Getzlaf shoot more. And anytime I've ever written anything about Getzlaf, if there was a negative, it's always shooting. And then I always make a note in anything I write about Getzlaf saying like, well, I know he's just going to go out and, throw it in my face, because last night he had 3 assists, right? Like with the guy's creativity and vision, like it's hard to second guess it. But
then the
shot
shootout
like
goal,
his, exactly. I mean, he can score goals, and I don't know if him scoring more or shooting more is gonna result in more wins for the Ducks, because I really trust his decision making. But it's crazy just seeing how he performs above his goal expectations, and just the shot that he has, to think that if he did shoot first more, how many more goals he'd have actually scored in his career.
Yeah, only in that one game last week did we see really that drop pass come back in the overtime. He made a great move and had the puck right in front of the net, and then did the drop pass, and the Ducks ended up losing in the shootout last week. And it was like, oh my God, I was cracking up, because like you said, everyone's always about him passing. They're always on Getzlaf for that, and that was the one. He hasn't really done the drop pass so much this season. It looks like he's been doing more effective passing, staying away from that kind of technique. He had a really great one last night that could have won it in the 3-on-3, a really sick pass where he made a good move. And that one I thought was a great play. Just the Ducks couldn't convert, and it was okay because they went to the shootout and won. But I think he's kind of gotten away from that, don't you think, a little bit? I mean, we only really saw it last week a couple times.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's more to just like the Ducks want to play faster, right? And usually when you're pulling up or doing drop passes, like, you're playing a little slower in transition. But anytime you can advance the puck toward the opposing goal, more times than not, you're going to generate chances, whether they're high-level chances or not. At least you're going to get traffic on goal. So I definitely have noticed that a bit more this season as well.
So with everything that's going on, we've been talking about patience and trust the process, and we're talking about the main guys, like you said, like, Getzlaf, Silfverberg, Raquel, Henrique, and Fowler, the guys that are leading the team, not just in points, but overall game, as we've been talking about. The trade deadline's coming up. I'll have like a separate show kind of going over a whole bunch of this stuff, but you have that. Then, of course, you have the expansion draft that's looming as well. And it seems like some people are kind of ready to just hit the fire sale button, maybe try to trade Silfverberg. I know you talked a little bit about it in your piece that you wrote for The Athletic, but do you think that the Ducks should try to trade Silfverberg? Because, his value is really high right now. He made the All-Star game. He's leading the team in scoring and whatnot. Or should they, trade other players too and try to like speed up this rebuild process?
I don't think that they should try to trade Silfverberg for a couple reasons. One, the deal that they have him on is awesome for a player for his versatility. I think it's at like 5.25 a year.
Correct.
So I think that's extremely valuable, especially as the cap is projected to rise. So you're going to have a player, an all-star level player now at that cap hit, who's 29 years old. And even though your team's going through a rebuild, he's an important piece. And I think that's the second point. If you're going to go through a rebuild, you still need a veteran presence. So if you can have a veteran presence who's still 29 years old and theoretically maybe in the prime of his career, I think you keep him over other possible forwards that might be available who might have, expiring contracts, obviously. But at the same time, like, if I was an NHL team, pretty much any team that's looking to make a serious push to the playoffs, I'd be calling Murray every single day about Silfverberg just because if you can get an impact player who still has 4 years left on his deal after this season, I believe, and is 29 years old, so the contract is going to age well. He's still going to be playing really good hockey, and you have a guy who can literally do everything for you. He just, if any team tried to acquire him, he's the type of guy that I believe could push any team like over the top. That if a team were to able to acquire him, like they have a really good shot of making it to the Stanley Cup final just because of what he can add in addition to whatever pieces that they already have that make them a playoff team. So I would definitely try to call the Ducks, but if I were the Ducks and I'm in a rebuild, he's the one guy who I'm like, I want to keep around. I want this guy around because he's going to age well with the young talent that's already there.
I think that's a key point, like you said, too, is a lot of people forget about the contract. And yeah, you're right. He's got 4 more years, and it is a good deal, just over $5 million for everything that he brings. Another thing we didn't even touch on, too, is even his shootout ability. He's got a couple shootout goals as well. And we've seen him, just snipe goals left and right in the extra session. And that's huge, too, because some of these games, like you said, you get down and it's a tie game, and it comes down to shootout, and the fact that you can put him out there on the ice, and not every time, but he has more chances than not that he's gonna score in a shootout and help you guys get that win. And we've seen him do that a couple times this season already.
He's a do everything guy. That's what makes him so valuable, and just the cap hit that makes him so valuable for other teams to really go all in. And I would imagine if a first rounder and a prospect would have to be a part of it just because of just the value of the contract. And that's a trend that we're seeing a lot in the NHL right now in terms of cap, the value that teams are putting on a cap space, right? We saw that with that Marleau trade from Toronto to Carolina. They pretty much said, hey, we'll eat his cap space for a first rounder, right? So I think because of just the bargain deal that type of player is on, that he'd command a high draft pick and more, especially at the trade deadline. So, but just as valuable as he is cap-wise to other teams, he's just as valuable for the Ducks to continue to keep in a rebuild so they have more money to go out and get supporting players to support him and the young guys. But if he's a long-term player for the Ducks, and who knows what's going to happen, who knows, Getzlaf's career's plans or whatever, but he's the type of guy who's a future captain. You know what I mean? I think he's very valuable that way. He just leads by example.
Oh, I agree 100%. Definitely leads by example. And I think you're right. If people are calling Murray, they're going to be having to throw, some serious, deal on the table for him to consider it. Because like you said, if you want him to stay on the team and be part of that rebuild for the next couple seasons, and then even for the turnaround after that, when the team gets back, hopefully to where they were, like we talked about, all the previous years before last season, that would be huge. If Murray does stay put with Silfverberg, if he says, no, I'm going to keep him for all the reasons you talked about, which are all very good reasons, and he says, I'm not going to, I want this guy to be part of the core going forward, do you still think that maybe some of the other players could be traded? Do you think that the Ducks could be sellers at the trade deadline to try to speed up the rebuild and maybe not necessarily get other current players in the NHL, but maybe try to get some more prospects or draft picks or whatnot?
Well, it's tough because they don't have too many expiring contracts of value, right? I mean,
right.
You have Rowney, you have Shore. There was rumors about Kasha before the year. I mean, maybe they look into that again if they get calls. You got Delorier, and the rest are pretty much entry level guys. So you're unless I'm not gonna say give up on a prospect, unless you're looking to move a prospect for, a potential, draft pick or something like that. There's really not much they can do up front, and even on the defensive side, I mean, a lot of they have they have a good amount of young guys, and Fowler's not going anywhere. I don't think Lindholm's going anywhere. I don't think Manson's going anywhere.
Right.
So I mean, they don't really have anyone to trade. I mean, I think another writer colleague, Eric Stephens, mentioned Ryan Miller if a team looking to have a tandem, but I think the Ducks would probably show him the respect because he wants to be at home with his family, right? So I don't think there's too many options for the Ducks to really provide other teams in order to get draft picks back, other than Silfverberg, but that's going to take a first rounder, a top prospect, and another piece, in my opinion, to start that conversation. So
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I looked at too, is with this trade deadline coming up. Typically, the Ducks don't make huge moves right at the trade deadline. Usually, if you look at some of the things, Murray will do things in the offseason, or like Henrique in the beginning of the season, things like that. It doesn't seem like he makes huge moves, and a lot of people get upset at that. I think in the past, it was a different scenario with this team. Like I said, the team, we all knew that they were pretty much going to make the playoffs for so many years in a row, and they won the Pacific Division for so many years in a row. So back then, people were like, well, let's add one player that can win us the cup. Now, this season and even last season, it's like, okay, how are we going to try and fix this team faster? But like you said, you look at the team. I mean, there's not a lot of people that you could really trade on here and outside of Silfverberg and get value in terms of a lot of high draft picks or prospects to speed it up. And I think the system, and we'll talk a little bit too here about the World Juniors too with Zegras. The Ducks have a lot of players in the system right now, and to me, I think, and like we said, unless they do something big with Silfverberg, they should rely on the players they have on the team now, the youth that's there, the other ones down the goals, and the guys coming up. Because, like you mentioned, certain players can jump into the league right away, and Zegras may be one of those guys that can jump in there right away. I mean, he was phenomenal at the World Juniors, so the Ducks have plenty of players in the pipeline, and like you said, it just may take a season or two for some of them to start firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, and just touching on. Well, we can kind of start the conversation regarding Zegras. I mean, right now the Ducks have Lundstrom, Jones, Steele, Terry. Is that 4 entry-level forwards on the team right now?
Right.
So by the time Zegras comes in the fold, and then you consider the expansion draft, I don't think all 4 of those guys are going to be there, because if you're adding a guy like Zegras, you have Silfverberg, Henrique, Getzlaff, probably Kasha, there's all these guys are kind of regarded as top 6 forwards, top 9 forwards. They're all not going to be there. So, if there was some sort of move to be made, and maybe that's not a trade deadline thing, maybe that's not a summer thing, maybe they move on from one of those young guys to kind of make way for Zegras, because, you're drafting players to play top 6 role or top 9 role or top 3 power play, whatever. And a lot of the top prospect guys that the Ducks have are for that top 6 role, but they have other guys in the fold who are waiting to get their opportunity, and there's not enough room. And by the time Zegras comes, who knows when that's going to be. He had such a great World Juniors where it would make sense that maybe they try to get him to come out this season, but maybe he needs to get stronger with another year. But by the time these entry levels start expiring and people need to start getting qualified, I mean, something's gonna give, because I don't think he's gonna leave BU to go play in the American League.
Yeah, exactly, and you're right. It will be kind of a crowded field at that time too. A
young crowded field.
Exactly. Which I think to me that's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah, I agree. And the same thing happened. If we kind of look back, the same thing happened on the defensive side a few years ago, and
correct.
I guess anyone can have their opinion on how they think that was handled, but they had, Montour, Theodore, even that Heed guy who plays for the Sharks. He's a Ducks draft pick, and they couldn't even sign him because they just had so many of them, right? And I'm sure they wish they had one of those guys now, at least one of them, because I think they're kind of lacking that extreme dynamic guy, and Theo's playing great. But they've been in this position before on the defensive side, so it's always good to kind of have a wealth and ton of depth in a certain area. And right now they have it up front with their young guys.
It's funny you talk about the defensive side and Theodore, and some fans are still really sore about the Vegas expansion draft. And of course, like you said, the Ducks had some depth at defense. They knew that things were going to happen, and then they obviously had to make the little side deals, which a lot of teams did with Vegas. Take this guy, so you pick this guy instead of that guy, and all this kind of stuff like that. And then of course now Seattle's in the fold. For me, I kind of don't like the expansion draft that way. That's just kind of how I feel. I think it's too much is going on. Like you remember when the other teams came in the 90s, right? When the Sharks came in, the Ducks in Florida, they picked the player from each team and you could protect him, a very similar way. The little side things, though, what do you think about that? I'm kind of curious because
what I personally think Vegas. I think it's going to go very different when Seattle has their chance at the expansion draft. Because I think Vegas I feel like they really pulled one over on the entire league. What they were able to get, the fear teams had and losing, this player or that player.
Yes.
It really kind of got sensationalized to the point where, Vegas almost wins the Stanley Cup the first year.
I know, crazy.
Granted, they overachieved, but like they got you got Shea Theodore for not
Yeah.
I don't even know I don't even remember the full thing, but you don't pick a guy on the Ducks roster and then you look at it 2 years later and you're like, we got Shea Theodore, like an elite puck moving defenseman, like. And you can just go down the list, and then with the amount of prospects and like bargaining chips they were able to get to draft the players that they draft, like Glass, or to make the cap space. And I mean, they got Pacioretty and Stone based off all the chips off the pieces that they got from different teams drafting players. I mean.
It was crazy.
It's honestly, it's unbelievable. And like, honestly, hats off to McPhee and that whole organization, because like they really pulled one over on the entire league. Like I see, and that's gonna hurt. So like, I think people who are gonna follow Seattle are gonna be super pumped about the team coming. Like, we have a chance to win. Like, I don't think these guys can get fooled like that again or pressured like that again.
Yeah.
Some teams will, who might have an embarrassment of riches, but I don't think it's going to happen like that again. That was too good, and a lot of mistakes were made.
Yeah, you would think maybe some of the GMs and owners going into this a second time around maybe got a little bit wiser, and they're not going to be, like you said, so sensationalized that, oh my God, I'm going to lose this forward or I'm going to lose this defenseman. And then I'll give them this guy, so they picked that guy. To me, it was just crazy the way that unfolded. There was like so much news going on around the expansion draft about who got what from where, all these crazy.
Like you said, the side deal part of it is obviously what made Vegas into what they are now. Like, one of the best organizations already in the NHL. Every player would love to play there. They've built such a culture, but it's really those little side deals, like the one that we saw with Theodore, is what made that organization unbelievable.
Yeah, and of course, the Ducks have to battle it out with them. I mean, it was great to see them at least finally win at home against Vegas. They had never beaten the Golden Knights at Honda Center, and that was actually, the Ducks played a really good game in that one. They jumped out to that 4-1 lead until the Knights got a couple late goals, but that was finally a good performance with the team. And then, of course, they lost when they were in Vegas, and there was all kinds of stuff going on in that game. Some things that I really didn't like. It's kind of maybe pick your brain a little bit on that if you saw that game. But they had the penalty shot in that game where Manson was called, and I didn't necessarily agree with that call. I thought he hit the stick and played the puck pretty well, but what did you think about that play as far as him defensively? Because, it ended up, the Ducks were trying to get back into it, and then it ended up going to a penalty shot, and Marchessault scored. And also some people thought maybe Marchessault brought the puck backwards, which I didn't see that part of it. I thought the penalty shot was a little bit much, in my opinion, on that play.
Well, I think it's subjective. I mean, me personally as a player, like, I think anytime a player has pretty, like I said, it's subjective in that way. But if you have a pretty clear route to the goal and you're inhibited anyway, whether it's stick or anything like that, like, I believe it's a penalty shot, because without that person protruding you in that way, you were going to have a breakaway.
Right.
And I thought the Marchessault goal, he did come back. I was surprised that was allowed, or that was a good goal, because he stopped and he went back, and I was actually really surprised. I remember looking at it a couple of times just on Twitter later at night and like that. That I don't think that is in the spirit of how a shootout should go in terms of what the rules are.
Yeah, that was a close play. I mean, that was the after that game happened, that was the two big points. One was should it have been a penalty shot, and then two, did the puck not continuously go forward? And you watched
it definitely didn't go forward, and
right.
I think that's maybe the benefit of replay, or,
right?
Us having slow motion, because I didn't really think much of it when I saw it.
Right.
I thought it was maybe borderline, and usually I always go, tie goes to the skill, right? Like
right.
I usually like it for the goals, but when you see it in slow motion, I was just like, that should not have been a goal, and that's something that Toronto covers and all that too, right? So
Right. I mean, I talked about it on the show too with my host before. We don't think it would have changed the outcome either way. It just was kind of interesting because it caused so much discussion amongst those 2 points. Whether it was a penalty shot and then whether the goal was valid. So it was kind of interesting. And I think kind of the theme with this team, looking back at some of these games recently too, is it seems like you remember a couple seasons ago they could never play well in the second period. Now it seems like the Ducks are playing well in two of the periods, and then there's always one period where they kind of slump. Is that something that you think is coaching, or do you think every team goes through that, or is it just the Ducks? Why do you think that they have a bad period?
I think every team goes through that, but I also think a bulk of their lineup is young players, especially up front. And they're adjusting to the NHL schedule and travel. Sure, they're chartering jets, but I remember I was talking to a former teammate of mine in college, Devon Tays with the Islanders. I'm like, I was like, hey, how's your first season in the NHL going? He's like, it's a grind. I'm like, okay, well, you're not taking buses like I was in the American League or flying Southwest, just doing that. You're taking, but he's just he was explaining to me just like if you're playing those back to backs and. You're playing minutes like that. It's really hard, especially for a young player who hasn't done that. So it's kind of them finding their thing. So I just think that's part of the growing pains of a young team. And I think that's something that maybe, I'd like to think that it's going to get, righted this year. But that's just part of growing up and getting used to the NHL schedule. And it's really up to the veterans to kind of get the team guided and help the young guys along in that regard.
Well, we saw kind of a flip of the script last night, too, when they played Nashville. I mean, the Ducks were just dropping shots on them left and right. They had, like, almost 50 shots in 60 minutes of play. It was, like, the craziest thing. I was like, what team is this? Where's this coming from?
Yeah, they've shown, like, a few times this year that they can really play up to their competition. And that's another thing I think that's kind of can be attributed to a young team, right? Like, the standings. Like, Nashville's a solid team, but then you go play a team, who's struggling in the standings,
like Detroit.
Like, exactly. You're like, oh, this is gonna be easy, and then it's not that easy. So, that's just part of learning to be a pro every single night. And the team just working through it together.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that this season too, because they've had some games where they played teams that, like you said, aren't performing as well, like Detroit, for example, Chicago not doing as well as they have in maybe seasons past. But then they'll play games like, for example, they play the Islanders in that wild game, and it was crazy. They ended up winning that one 6-5. So
yeah, I was like shocked. I was like,
yeah, who's this team again? So I think a lot of people talk about that too, and they're like, well, the Ducks play up to the competition, they play down to the competition. Do you think a lot of that is more of this rebuilding in the younger players and them just trying to figure out, hey, we got to play consistent every night? And more,
yeah, I would think so. I mean, the guys have been there for a while. They know that it's the NHL, and you can be gotten on every single night. But I mean, for a younger guy, like hey, you're a younger guy. You haven't really produced as much as you like. Like, okay, like here's my opportunity against Detroit, thinking that it might be a little easier than it really is. And hey, they have NHL players too, and they got young guys who, same age as you guys, who are looking to make a name for themselves, and they're thinking the same thing. So it's, it's really, whoever has the better mentality that night, because they have the same kind of young group, in Detroit, who's looking to kind of make a name for themselves too.
It's funny you talk about the mental part of the game too, which I think a lot of us don't focus on. Most people look at, hey, how many goals did this guy score? How many assists? What's his plus minus? Which I don't even like the plus minus stat. I like to look more at the analytics because plus minus is kind of more a team stat a little bit.
For sure. I mean, you're getting a statistic there. You're one of 5 or 6 players if you count the goalie on the ice. I mean, I've had seasons where I've been plus a bunch, and I've had seasons where I've been minus a bunch. I mean, there's a whole lot of different factors that go into that. So I don't like that stat unless it favors me. But it's not that reliable of a stat.
Right. I agree. Talking about the mental part, because you've played the game and whatnot, how much does the mental part, impact your play? Would you, if you were to put a percentage on it, like 100% or 50%, what would you say, especially being younger players developing in the NHL, transitioning from the AHL, as you said, it's more of a grueling experience, which Dallas Aikens has talked about as well.
Yeah, I don't want to say 100%, it's 100% mental, but I'd like to put it this way, right? Like if you're drafted or signed to an NHL contract, like it's very hard to get an NHL contract.
Right.
Like extremely hard. And like I played in the American League for a few years, but I was on NHL contract my rookie year, and then I was just on AHL contracts from that point on. So it's very hard to do that. Even I've had good seasons and I've been on American League deals. So I'm just saying it's very hard to get an NHL contract. So if you keep that in mind, a team signs you to the NHL contract, they believe that in some capacity, if called upon, if you develop, that you can be or are an NHL player, meaning you have tools that work in the NHL and they see that from you. So the team believes you have the tools. You've shown that you've had the tools, and you've obviously had to prove it at a certain level. So what's keeping you from the NHL? So I think a big part of that is just mentally. Can you mentally find and bring your game every single night to the level that the team that's, believe in you thinks that you can play? And obviously, outside of like, I always say, like, if you're a top 6 guy or a top, 4 defenseman, like you belong in the NHL. And then outside of that, like a bottom 6 guy, or like, it could be about, you impress this scout who's going to fight for you, or this coach, when you're like a bottom guy on an NHL roster, it's more of like, what are those traits that make you valuable? So even from when you look at that, like that's even more mental. So it's like every night, like I need to be phenomenal on the penalty kill. Every night I need to finish every single check. And if you just played 2 games and you had a night off, you're playing your third night in 4 games, your third game in 4 nights. Are you going to be mentally prepared to take hits and make hits, even though your body's just like, I need a break? So I think the mental part's huge, and that's especially for a rookie. When there's so much going on, there's so much new, I think the mental part is huge in terms of you having a good year and a bad year. And I know for myself personally, I struggled with the mental side my rookie year. I was in the Sabres organization, and the organization was a mess, but I know there was some adversity that went on that I wish I would have handled a million times better. And I think that would have largely changed how that season went, but it also made me stronger for the years going further. So I think the mental part's huge. Sorry to ramble there, but it can't be stated enough in my opinion.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, you've got firsthand experience. That's why I asked the question. Another part of that you kind of talked about is, we talk about draft picks and being, high up in the draft, first round, maybe top 10 or just first rounder, second rounder. And then, like you said, that desire to produce every night, whether it's, hey, I'm the guy that's got to go score goals. I'm the guy that's got to shut him down. I got to win these key faceoffs, things like that. Do you think draft position 2 is something that is added maybe by players internally as mental stress, I guess, is, like, hey, I was drafted in the first round?
I think it depends. I mean, like when I was with Buffalo, or when I signed in Buffalo, they drafted what's his name? Oh, Brandon Lemieux,
right?
Who was supposed to be a first rounder, but he was wound up being the first pick in the second round. And he gets out in front of the cameras. He's all pissed off, and he literally plays with that chip on his shoulder every single night. Like I remember doing prospect camp with the kid, and he was still fuming about it, and he just played with such an edge in it. and empowered them. I mean, I think draft position can really mean what you want. I know I didn't get drafted my first year of eligibility. I got drafted my second year of eligibility, and I was the fourth to last pick by the Thrashers, who aren't even an organization anymore. But a team in the NHL thinking I had some sort of NHL future meant everything to me. So I went and played for a shitty team at Bowling Green my freshman year. But I thought I mentally was in such a great place because I'm like, man, I'm going to be an NHL player. Like, this team believes in me. Like, I'm drafted. So I think it just kind of all depends on who the person is. You can kind of spin it however you want.
Right.
I just say, spin it to whatever's going to make you good. Some players will be complacent if they get drafted, or other players will be pissed that they weren't drafted high enough, or
right.
They thought they were drafted too low. It all depends.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it does depend, and there are factors in there. I can see that too, where if you're not drafted as high, you use it as motivation, or like you said, you're drafted high up, and you're like, oh, I can just coast. I made the first round. I'm here. Let's go. So I think
you see that all the time with young guys, especially the ones who are first rounders, second rounders, who start off in the American League. I think that's a difference, between the ones who make it and the ones who don't. A, it's the mental side. B, it's keeping the confidence and maintain that confidence even if the results aren't instant. And C, just pretty much just because you're drafted doesn't mean you accomplished anything yet. You've never played in the NHL and you're not a full-time NHLer, so you got to keep that thing. You got to keep that in mind. Getting drafted, that's just beginning the journey.
Right.
Signing the entry-level contract, that's just beginning. You still haven't played in the NHL yet, and even when you play in the NHL, you haven't played enough games to get a pension there. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's a bunch of different levels to it.
Right. And, talking about all those different levels and everything, like we said, this Ducks team has a lot of those types of players now, players that have come up in the system. Like you said, they're only in their first or second year and everything going. I guess kind of to wrap up more of the show in the last part here is, what do you think about this team as far as moving forward for this season? If they're not sellers at the trade deadline, they keep the Raquel, Getzlaf, Silfverberg, the Henriques and all that we've talked about. They keep that core together. What do you think the plan should be for the Ducks, after the trade deadline and beyond, basically?
Yeah, I don't think the Ducks certainly aren't looking short term. They're looking for a long term solution to get themselves back to where they were, a playoff team every year. And I think fans should kind of have that same idea in mind too when they look at the Ducks. This year, I believe, is just a culture setting year. I mean, the results haven't always been there, but you see how players have interacted with Dallas Eakins and how it makes them feel, and how they feel, more excited to go out and play every night. You have a guy like Eakins there who cares for them. And then, for the young guys, it's just about, okay, you're not producing, but still have that confidence and make the most of the experience that you're having. If you're, it's a team like the Maple Leafs. They have so many prospects. They've had so many prospects that they've had who are really highly rated, like a Bracco, right? If Bracco was in the Ducks organization, he would have been in the NHL for 2 years, but he hasn't. So they can appreciate having their first year or 2 years mainly of gaining professional experience at the NHL, and I think that's going to be extremely valuable for them. So I think this year it's just not focusing on the short term, but knowing that the Ducks at least have a plan and a process that they believe in getting back to where they want to be. Whether it works out or not, time will tell, but I think you should always be happy that a team has a plan and that they're sticking to the plan, and it seems like that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I think, like you said, they're not in panic mode. It doesn't seem like, hey, come the trade deadline, let's just sell all the big name players that we can that don't have, no trade clauses and whatnot. Let's just try and, speed this up even more. I don't know if there's that much speeding up more to do. I think a lot of it starts with the coach, and you know him well, and a lot of the players have talked about it. The atmosphere and the attitudes in the locker room has vastly improved this season with Dallas Eakins at the helm.
For sure, and like I said, anytime you have a new coach or you're rebuilding or transition process, whatever anyone wants to call it, I think the normal thing is for it to be rough for a year or a year and a half or whatever. It's not usually instant results, so I think you got to keep that in mind on what's realistic. And I think that I think that what's happening right now with the Ducks is realistic. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have a better record or they should have a worse record. We've already touched on how many close games they've been in and
Right.
what could have been and what should have been. It could have gone either way, but I think that you're seeing what the Ducks are with your eyes on a nightly basis, but now you're just going to continue watching the development, because I think the players have made strides, especially the young guys from day one to whatever game 42 that they're on now. So, I mean, that should be encouraging. And I think at least the young guys that I know on the team, like Larson and Max Jones, I played on the line with during playoffs in San Diego, like, those two guys are high confidence guys, like, and they work hard. So, like, for me, like, I don't have any fear that they're not going to pan out and be productive players for the Ducks moving forward. And I just think patience is the key for all of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, the other thing is some of these games we've talked about, we've seen this team have flashes of greatness. They've played in some of these games, and they've done well. Maybe not dominating on the scoreboard necessarily, but I mean, even in the game against Nashville, you look at the way they started the game with all the all the shots. It was like, holy crap, and then for them to they got behind, but then they rattled off a bunch of goals and got ahead again. We've seen flashes of that throughout the season, and we've seen them play well. We talked about it a lot of times against the higher quality teams, not so much the other teams, but it's there. I think the big thing with this team is trying to figure out, like you and I have talked about, is how to do that consistently, period from period, and night in and night out.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think that's what this year is about, figuring out how to bring that consistency. And then when next year rolls around, you want to see the next step to that. You want to see them playing at 90% or 80% of what they're capable every single night, no matter who the competition.
Yeah, exactly. And then when that happens, I'll have you on the show again at that point, and then we'll be back and we'll talk about how they're doing it next season.
Yeah, for sure.
So thanks. I appreciate you coming on. I know it's kind of short notice. I was going to hit you up after you'd written the article, but then the timing kind of worked out good because, Silfverberg making, all-star news, and then, people talking about some trade stuff. So I think it worked out really good. And I always appreciate, you taking the time to come and talk to me. And I know we talk on social media too as well.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to join and contribute. And it was good to catch up with you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.